When a racist cop screamed at 74-year-old elderly black man screamed outside the grocery store, no one expected 60 soldiers in Humvees to arrive led by Captain Rodriguez, and the entire street fell silent. William Thompson had been following the same routine for 37 years. Every Tuesday morning at 7:30 a.m. sharp, he walked the 6 blocks from his small apartment to Miller's grocery store on Oak Street. His cane tapped a steady rhythm against the sidewalk, a sound that had become as familiar to the neighborhood as the morning church bells. At 74, William moved with the deliberate precision of a man who understood that consistency was survival. His khaki pants were pressed sharp enough to cut a paper. His white button-down shirt bore no wrinkles. His black shoes gleamed despite their age. Everything about William Thompson spoke of discipline, though few people bothered to look closely enough to notice. The neighborhood had changed around him over the decades. Young families moved in and out. Businesses opened and closed. But William remained constant, a living landmark that few residents acknowledged. To most, he was just another elderly black man navigating his twilight years in relative obscurity. What they didn't know was that William Thompson woke every morning at 5 a.m., completed 45 minutes of physical therapy exercises, prepared a breakfast timed to military precision, and spent 30 minutes reviewing local news. His apartment walls held no photographs, no medals, no certificates. He had removed them all years ago when the nightmares began again. Officer Miguel Martinez had been patrolling Oak Street for 8 months. 26 years old, 2 years out of the academy, he carried himself with the aggressive confidence of someone still proving himself. His supervisor had warned him about problem areas in his district, certain corners where troublemakers gathered, certain types of people who didn't belong. This Tuesday morning felt different. Martinez had responded to 3 domestic disturbance calls before dawn. His supervisor had criticized his report writing. His girlfriend had mentioned wedding plans again. Stress built behind his temples like storm clouds gathering. He spotted William Thompson from half a block away, an elderly black man walking alone, moving slowly, carrying something in his hand that Martinez couldn't identify from this distance. In Martinez's mind, algorithms of suspicion began calculating. Elderly man plus early morning plus something in hand equaled potential shoplifting, potential drug deal, potential problem. William felt the patrol car slowing behind him. 49 years of situational awareness had taught him to recognize the sound of predatory attention. His grip tightened slightly on his grocery list, handwritten in neat block letters. His pace remained steady. His breathing stayed controlled. The morning sun cast long shadows across Oak Street as 2 men approached an inevitable collision. Officer Martinez pulled his patrol car to the curb with deliberate aggression, the engine's rumble cutting through the morning quiet. He stepped out with the exaggerated swagger of authority, his hand already resting on his utility belt. The sound of his boots against asphalt echoed off the nearby buildings like gunshots. "Excuse me, sir," Martinez called out, his voice carrying the sharp edge of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "I need to speak with you." William Thompson stopped walking but didn't turn around immediately. He closed his eyes for 3 seconds, drew a deep breath through his nose, and summoned the patience he'd learned in places where patience meant survival. When he turned, his expression remained neutral, his posture straight despite the arthritis in his spine. "Good morning, officer," William said, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone who understood that every word could be weaponized against him. "How can I help you?" Martinez approached with the confident stride of someone who had never been questioned, never been challenged, never been forced to examine the assumptions driving his actions. His mirrored sunglasses reflected William's image back at him, distorted and diminished. "What are you doing out here so early?" Martinez demanded, his tone suggesting that William's presence required justification. "Where are you going?" "To the grocery store," William replied simply. "Same as every Tuesday for 37 years. Martinez scanned William from head to toe, his gaze lingering on the cane, the pressed clothes, the careful grooming. Something about William's composure irritated him. Old men were supposed to be nervous around police. They were supposed to stammer and apologize and make excuses. "What's in your hand?" Martinez stepped closer, invading William's personal space with practiced intimidation. William held up the folded piece of paper. "My grocery list." "Let me see it." William handed over the paper without resistance. Martinez unfolded it with exaggerated care, scanning the neat handwriting. Milk, bread, eggs, bananas, nothing suspicious, nothing that justified his growing aggression. But backing down now would mean admitting error, and Miguel Martinez had never learned how to admit error. Across the street, Mrs. Chen paused while watering her flower boxes. She recognized William immediately, the polite man who always tipped his hat when passing her house. She watched with growing concern as the young officer's posture became increasingly aggressive. 2 doors down, Marcus Williams stepped onto his porch. The 43-year-old electrician was running late for work, but something about the scene unfolding made him stop. He pulled out his phone and quietly began recording. The morning sun climbed higher, casting shorter shadows as tension thickened like humidity. "This doesn't look right," Martinez said, his voice rising with manufactured authority. He waved the grocery list as if it contained evidence of wrongdoing. "An old man walking around this early, carrying papers. You could be casing houses, planning break-ins." William's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. In his 74 years, he had faced enemy fire, congressional hearings, and personal tragedies that would have broken weaker men. But public humiliation based on nothing more than his age and skin color still had the power to ignite something dangerous in his chest. "Officer," William said, his voice remaining steady despite the fire building behind his ribs, "I've committed no crime. I've been walking this same route for decades. These neighbors know me." "Don't tell me what I know," Martinez exploded, his voice echoing off the buildings. Several more residents emerged from their houses, drawn by the commotion. "I see an elderly black man wandering around at suspicious hours, and I'm going to investigate. That's my job." Mrs. Chen gasped audibly from across the street. Marcus Williams moved closer, his phone capturing every word. Other neighbors began gathering at windows and doorways, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and concern. Martinez grabbed William's arm with unnecessary force. "Turn around and put your hands against the car. I'm searching you for weapons and contraband." "This is harassment," William said, but he complied with the order. He had learned long ago that physical resistance, regardless of legal justification, could prove fatal for men who looked like him. Martinez conducted an aggressive pat-down while neighbors watched in growing horror. He searched William's pockets, his wallet, even his shoes. The search revealed exactly what any reasonable person would expect: an elderly man's everyday items: reading glasses, a few dollar bills, prescription medication, a worn photograph. Martinez held up the photograph, a faded image of a young soldier in dress uniform. "What's this supposed to be? Some kind of fake military ID?" William's composure cracked for the first time. That photograph had survived 3 combat deployments, 2 divorces, and 49 years of carrying it everywhere. It showed Second Lieutenant William Thompson on the day he received his commission, young and proud and ready to serve his country. "That's me," William said quietly. 53 years ago." Martinez laughed with genuine cruelty. "Right. And I'm Napoleon. You expect me to believe some old man shuffling around with a cane used to be a soldier?" The crowd of neighbors grew larger. Cell phones appeared. The humiliation became public entertainment. What none of them knew was that 7 miles away, a phone was already ringing. Marcus Williams had seen enough. While continuing to record with one hand, he speed-dialed his brother-in-law with the other. Tony Rodriguez worked security at Fort Jackson, the nearby military installation. If this elderly man was really a veteran being humiliated in public, Tony would know what to do. "Tony, it's Marcus. I need you to listen carefully. There's a cop harassing an elderly black man on Oak Street. The guy claims to be a veteran, and the cop is treating him like garbage. This is getting bad, man." Tony Rodriguez stopped mid-stride in the Fort Jackson security office. At 38, he had 12 years of military experience and zero tolerance for disrespect toward veterans. "What's the man's name?" Marcus called out to William, who was still pressed against the patrol car. "Sir, what's your name?" "William Thompson," came the dignified reply despite the circumstances. Tony's blood went cold. He knew that name. Every career military person stationed at Fort Jackson knew that name. William Thompson wasn't just any veteran. He was a legend. "Marcus," Tony's voice became urgent. "Whatever you do, don't let that cop do anything else to him. I'm making calls right now. Keep recording everything." Tony immediately dialed Captain Elena Rodriguez, the base commander's assistant. "Captain, we have a code red situation in town. Civilian police are harassing Colonel William Thompson." "Yes, ma'am, that William Thompson." Captain Rodriguez had never met William Thompson personally, but she had studied his service record during officer training. 3 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, Distinguished Service Cross. More importantly, he had personally trained half the senior officers currently serving at Fort Jackson. She grabbed her radio. "All available units prepare for immediate deployment. We have a veteran in distress situation downtown. I want 60 soldiers, 12 Humvees, and full dress presentation. Move now." Meanwhile, Martinez continued his public humiliation of William. He had ordered the elderly man to sit on the curb while he called for backup. William sat with perfect posture despite the indignity, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes fixed on some distant point that only he could see. "You know what I think?" Martinez said, playing to the growing crowd. "I think you're having mental issues. Confused elderly man wandering around, making up stories about being a soldier. Maybe I should call social services, get you evaluated." Mrs. Chen couldn't stay silent any longer. "Officer, that man has lived here for decades. He's never caused any trouble. Leave him alone." Martinez whirled around. "Ma'am, step back, or I'll arrest you for interfering with police business." In the distance, the first rumble of approaching engines could barely be heard. The sound started as a low rumble, like distant thunder rolling across the horizon. Mrs. Chen noticed it first, her head turning toward the main road that led from Fort Jackson into town. Marcus Williams paused his recording, straining to identify the familiar mechanical growl that was growing steadily louder. Officer Martinez, still focused on his verbal assault of William Thompson, remained oblivious to the approaching sounds. He had moved beyond harassment into outright abuse, his voice carrying across the neighborhood as he berated the elderly man sitting with quiet dignity on the curb. "I've been thinking about this situation," Martinez announced to his captive audience of neighbors, "and I believe we're dealing with a disturbed individual. Elderly black men don't just become military officers. That's not how the world works." William closed his eyes and took a deep breath. In his mind, he was back in the jungles of Vietnam, teaching young soldiers how to survive their first combat patrol. Patience, he had always told them. Wait for the right moment. Never reveal your hand until you're ready to play it. The rumbling grew louder. Now, even Martinez could hear it, though he couldn't identify the source. It sounded like multiple heavy vehicles moving at high speed, their engines synchronized in a way that suggested military precision. Tony Rodriguez's voice crackled through Marcus's phone. "Marcus, are you still there? Tell me exactly what's happening right now." "The cop is still harassing him," Marcus whispered. making speeches about how black men can't be soldiers. It's getting worse." "It's about to get better," Tony replied grimly. "Look toward the main road." The first Humvee appeared around the corner like something out of an action movie. Its massive frame filled the width of the residential street, desert camouflage paint gleaming in the morning sun. Behind it came another, then another. The convoy rolled through the neighborhood with the unstoppable momentum of military might responding to an emergency. Mrs. Chen counted them as they passed. 12 Humvees in perfect formation, each vehicle carrying armed soldiers in full battle dress uniform. The sound was overwhelming, engines roaring, equipment rattlings, the mechanical symphony of serious military hardware. Martinez finally looked up from his harassment of William. His jaw dropped as he watched the convoy approaching. "What the hell is this?" William Thompson opened his eyes and smiled for the first time that morning. It was a small smile, barely visible, but it carried 53 years of satisfaction. He recognized the sound of cavalry coming to the rescue. The lead Humvee stopped 50 feet away. Its engine idled with predatory patience. The lead Humvee's door opened with mechanical precision, and Captain Elena Rodriguez stepped out with the bearing of someone accustomed to commanding respect in any situation. At 42, she carried herself with the confident authority of 15 years in military service, her uniform pressed to perfection, her expression deadly serious. Behind her, 60 soldiers emerged from 12 vehicles in perfect synchronization. They formed ranks with practiced efficiency, their boots hitting pavement in rhythm, their weapons at parade rest, their faces showing the disciplined neutrality that military training burned into a soldier's core. The neighborhood fell silent. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Martinez stood frozen beside his patrol car, his mouth hanging open as he processed the impossible scene unfolding before him. 60 armed soldiers had just deployed in his patrol area like something out of a war movie. His training had never covered this scenario. Captain Rodriguez walked directly toward William Thompson, completely ignoring Martinez's existence. When she reached the elderly man still sitting on the curb, she stopped 3 feet away and rendered a perfect military salute. "Colonel Thompson," she said, her voice carrying across the silent street. "Sir, we received reports that you were being harassed." The word "colonel" hit the gathered crowd like a physical blow. Mrs. Chen gasped. Marcus Williams stopped recording, his phone forgotten in his suddenly trembling hand. The neighbors who had been watching the scene like street entertainment suddenly realized they had witnessed something far more serious. Martinez found his voice first. "Now wait just a minute here. I don't know what kind of game this is, but I'm conducting official police business with this individual." Captain Rodriguez turned toward Martinez for the first time, and her gaze could have melted steel. "Officer, you are addressing Colonel William Thompson, United States Army, retired. This man served 3 combat tours, personally trained hundreds of officers, including myself, and holds more decorations for valor than you have years of life experience." She paused, letting the information sink in. "Colonel Thompson is what we call a living legend, and you, Officer Martinez, have just publicly humiliated one of the most respected veterans in American military history." William Thompson stood slowly, his dignity intact despite everything he had endured. He looked at Captain Rodriguez with the same steady gaze that had once commanded battlefields and briefing rooms. "Captain," he said quietly, "I appreciate the response, but this young man was simply doing what he thought was his job." Martinez's face had gone pale. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by the dawning realization that he had made a career-ending mistake. Captain Rodriguez stepped closer to Martinez, her voice dropping to a tone that carried more menace than any shout could have managed. "Officer, let me educate you about exactly who you've been harassing this morning." She gestured toward William Thompson, who stood with the same quiet dignity that had characterized his entire ordeal. Colonel William Thompson enlisted in the Army at age 18. He served 3 combat tours in Vietnam, where he earned his first Bronze Star for pulling 6 wounded soldiers out of an enemy ambush under heavy fire. Martinez's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. The crowd of neighbors pressed closer, hanging on every word. After Vietnam, Rodriguez continued, Colonel Thompson attended officer candidate school and was commissioned as a second lieutenant. He spent the next 30 years training some of the finest soldiers this country has ever produced. Half the senior staff at Fort Jackson learned leadership from this man. She pulled out her phone and showed Martinez a photograph. This is Colonel Thompson receiving the Distinguished Service Cross from a 4-star general. The citation reads, "For extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations involving conflict with an armed hostile force." William remained silent, but his eyes never left Martinez's face. He was watching the young officer process the magnitude of his error, observing the exact moment when arrogance collapsed into understanding. During Operation Desert Storm, Rodriguez's voice gained momentum. Colonel Thompson led a training program that prepared over 2,000 soldiers for combat deployment. His methods saved countless lives. After 9/11, he came out of retirement to help develop counterterrorism training protocols. Marcus Williams found his voice. "Holy shit," he whispered, then immediately apologized to Mrs. Chen for the language. Martinez looked around at the crowd, at the 60 soldiers standing at attention, at the cell phone cameras recording his humiliation. I didn't know. He never said anything about—" "Why should he have to?" Captain Rodriguez interrupted. "Why should any veteran have to prove their service to avoid harassment? Why should a 74-year-old man need to recite his medals to walk to the grocery store in peace?" William Thompson finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of 5 decades in uniform. "Officer Martinez, may I ask you something?" Martinez nodded, his earlier aggression completely evaporated. "When you put on that badge this morning, did you swear an oath to protect and serve?" "Yes, sir." "Then tell me, Officer Martinez, who exactly were you protecting by forcing me to sit on this curb?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Martinez stared at the ground, his face flushed with shame as the weight of William's question settled on his shoulders. Around him, 60 soldiers maintained their disciplined formation while neighbors continued recording what had become a masterclass in dignity under fire. Martinez began, then stopped. He had no answer that wouldn't reveal the ugly assumptions that had driven his actions. An elderly black man walking in his neighborhood had seemed suspicious for no reason other than his age and skin color. The truth was too damning to speak aloud. William Thompson studied the young officer with the same analytical gaze he had once used to evaluate soldiers under his command. He recognized the signs: pride wrestling with reality, ego colliding with evidence, the painful moment when comfortable prejudices met uncomfortable truth. "Officer Martinez," William said gently, "how old are you?" 26, sir." "I've been walking these streets since before you were born. I've been serving this country since your father was in diapers. And yet this morning you saw me as a threat. Why do you think that is?" Captain Rodriguez watched the exchange with professional interest. This was Colonel Thompson's legendary teaching method in action. Patient questioning that forced students to confront their own assumptions rather than simply lecturing them about right and wrong. Martinez looked up from the ground, meeting William's eyes for the first time since the confrontation began. "Sir, I made assumptions, bad assumptions." "What kind of assumptions?" The young officer's voice cracked slightly. "I assumed that someone who looked like you, at your age, didn't belong in this neighborhood. I assumed you were up to something suspicious. I assumed—" He paused, gathering courage. "I assumed you couldn't have been a soldier because of how you looked." Mrs. Chen wiped tears from her eyes. Marcus Williams had resumed recording, but now his phone captured something entirely different, a public moment of genuine accountability that was rarer than gold. William nodded slowly. "And where do you think those assumptions came from, Officer Martinez?" Martinez was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "From ignorance, sir. From prejudice I didn't even know I was carrying." "The first step toward wisdom," William said, his tone carrying no mockery, "is recognizing ignorance. The second step is choosing to do something about it." Captain Rodriguez felt a surge of pride. Even in humiliation, Colonel Thompson was still teaching, still building better soldiers, better people, better citizens. The morning sun had climbed higher, burning away shadows and revealing truth. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, her commanding presence drawing everyone's attention. "Officer Martinez, Colonel Thompson has shown you more grace than you deserve, but grace without accountability is meaningless." She pulled out her radio. "Base Command, this is Captain Rodriguez. I need a direct line to the mayor's office and the police chief. Priority 1. Martinez's face went white. His career was about to be discussed at the highest levels of city government. The video footage of his conduct would soon be in the hands of people who could end his law enforcement career with a single phone call. "Captain," William Thompson interrupted gently, "may I suggest an alternative approach?" Rodriguez paused, her finger hovering over the radio button. In her years of service, she had learned to trust Colonel Thompson's judgment implicitly. "What do you have in mind, sir?" William walked closer to Martinez, who stood rigid with fear and shame. "Officer Martinez, you made a serious error in judgment this morning. You humiliated me in public, violated my civil rights, and demonstrated behavior that has no place in law enforcement." Martinez nodded, unable to speak. "However," William continued, "I believe in redemption through education rather than destruction through punishment. Here's what's going to happen." He gestured toward Captain Rodriguez. "You're going to spend the next 6 months participating in a veteran awareness program that Captain Rodriguez will design. Every Saturday morning, you'll volunteer at the VA hospital. You'll listen to veteran stories. You'll learn what service actually means." Martinez's eyes widened. He had expected to lose his job, possibly face federal civil rights charges. Instead, he was being offered a chance to earn redemption through service. "Additionally," William said, his voice gaining strength, "you'll undergo bias training with a focus on elderly citizens and racial profiling. You'll write a public apology that will be published in the local newspaper. And you'll speak at community meetings about what you learned from this experience." Captain Rodriguez smiled with admiration. Even in victory, Colonel Thompson was still focused on building rather than destroying. "Sir," Martinez said, his voice thick with emotion, "why are you giving me this chance, after what I did to you?" William Thompson looked at the young officer with eyes that had seen both the worst and best of human nature. "Because, Officer Martinez, someone once gave me a second chance when I needed it, and because destroying you won't make me any less humiliated. But educating you might prevent another elderly veteran from experiencing what I experienced today." The street remained silent as profound wisdom settled over the crowd. 3 months later, Officer Miguel Martinez walked through the halls of the VA hospital, carrying a stack of thank-you cards from patients he had visited during his Saturday volunteer shifts. His uniform looked the same, but everything else about him had changed fundamentally. He paused outside room 127, where Vietnam veteran Robert Jackson was recovering from surgery. Jackson had initially refused to speak with Martinez, his trust in law enforcement shattered by decades of similar encounters. But persistence and genuine humility had eventually broken through the old soldier's defenses. "Morning, Mr. Jackson," Martinez said softly, settling into the bedside chair he had occupied every Saturday for 12 weeks. "How are you feeling today?" Jackson smiled, a sight that had taken 6 weeks to achieve. "Better, Officer Martinez, much better. Did you bring those photographs I asked about?" Martinez opened a folder containing pictures from his bias training sessions, his community presentations, and his volunteer work. But the photo he pulled out first was different. It showed him and William Thompson standing together outside the grocery store on Oak Street, both men smiling. "Colonel Thompson and I have become friends," Martinez explained. "He's teaching me things about service that I never learned in the police academy." Jackson studied the photograph with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read people's character in their faces. "That's good, son. Real good. Takes a big man to admit he was wrong. Takes an even bigger man to do something about it." Outside the hospital, Martinez's radio crackled with a routine call. "Unit 47, we have a wellness check request. Elderly resident, 1200 block of Pine Street. Neighbors concerned about lack of activity." 6 months ago, Martinez would have approached such a call with assumptions and aggression. Today, he responded with patience and respect. He had learned that behind every door lived someone's story, someone's service, someone's dignity that deserved protection rather than suspicion. As he drove toward Pine Street, Martinez thought about the conversation he'd had with William Thompson the previous weekend. The colonel had shared stories about young soldiers he'd trained, men who had made mistakes but learned from them, who had gone on to become leaders and protectors rather than threats and bullies. "Everyone deserves a chance to become better than they were yesterday," William had said. "The question isn't whether you made mistakes, Officer Martinez. The question is what you do with the lessons those mistakes taught you." Martinez smiled as he pulled up to 1200 Pine Street. Today, like every day since that morning on Oak Street, he had the chance to choose service over suspicion, understanding over assumption, dignity over degradation. Today, he chose correctly.